Welcome to Theology 335, Week 2, Part 2. At the beginning of this part, we'd just like to make a brief mention of the principles and ideas that we actually got from the Greek philosophers. We've been talking about God, a little bit about morality, a little bit about the nature of mankind from a Christian perspective. And it's important to know that even before Christianity, well before Christianity, in which we have the advantage not only of using our own natural reason, but we also have God's revelation in Scripture and God coming to us actually in person as Jesus in a way that we can perceive him. They did not have these advantages, and yet, simply by the use of human reason and by their fantastic powers of perception, they came to many principles that we still use today, that we combine, we baptize them in a sense. We combine them with revelation to come up with a fuller picture of God and his designs. The first person we will mention is Aristotle. Now, as with all of the other Greek philosophers, Aristotle, his investigations, his ideas, his writings ranged over a wide selection of topics and areas and so on and so forth. The Greeks had no concept, as we do, of splitting intellectual, spiritual, moral pursuits into different categories. Knowledge was knowledge, and they were interested in all of it. But a couple of concepts that Aristotle did come up with were what he called mind, and by mind he meant that which is permanent. And this is all related to the use of reason. For example, knowledge of things, truth which is changeless and eternal, it's not subjective, that there are absolutes, that the good, there is a true good, and life, wisdom, being, this type of stuff. He contrasted that with what he called the senses. The senses are something that is always in the process of becoming, and this includes things that we can perceive and things that we feel, such as our passions, our emotions, our various appetites. All of these sensual things are unreliable in the cosmic absolute sense because they are transient. Feelings, passions, appetites are not permanent. They simply tell us what we know now at this point in time. These concepts were taken up, among many others, by the great Christian philosopher Thomas Aquinas, and it was the foundation of some of his very rational ways of thinking. Of course, his were also informed by divine revelation in the Christian sense. The next philosopher we'll mention is Plato, who also thought and wrote very widely on a great variety of subjects. The only one that we'll mention briefly here was his concept of what he called ideas or forms. These are the ultimate reality. This is something ideal that exists outside of what we as humans experience. In the sensible world, the world that we can perceive through our senses, everything that we perceive is some shadow, literally, of these ultimate realities. This comes really close to our understanding of ourselves as the image of God. We're not God. We don't look like God. We in no sense, we are a pale shadow of God. The same way he said that everything we can perceive is a pale shadow of what is real. And this diagram here shows one of the famous things about Plato that he came up with, the allegory of the cave, where we, people living in this world, are like prisoners who are looking at not the entrance to a cave, but the back wall of a cave. And they just sit there and they can't turn their heads to see where the shadows they are seeing on the wall are coming from. Every once in a while, and when they think this is reality, because that's the only thing they can see, every so often someone can rise above this perception and perceive things closer to reality. For example, a great philosopher or a great theologian, we might say. But the general run of humanity never sees true reality. They simply see shadows of the real. So his idea of forms also means the substance or essence of the physical reality. Like there's not a horse, there's hoarseness, which is a wider concept. And in some way this influenced the thinking of the soul informing the body, and his idea was contributed to the idea that arose in Christianity of soul and body being two separate entities. This was not an idea in the Jewish world that Christianity came from. And although we can speak separately of the soul and the body, in truth we cannot separate them. We are enfleshed spirits. Our body is just not a container that we are currently using and will someday discard. No, we are physical beings, physical and spiritual beings, and we will always have a body, even in our eternal life in heaven. Only it'll be a glorified body, but it'll still be our body. It will still bear a resemblance to the body we currently have. So, but it is interesting that he on his own, without divine revelation, came to many of these really deep and intricate concepts, and others that we're not going to mention at the moment. The final Greek philosopher that we will mention is Socrates, who lived from 470 to 399 BC. And Socrates also was a wide-ranging philosopher, and he also, all the philosophers were also teachers. And he's the one that we are referring to when we talk about teaching by the Socratic method, not simply standing up and lecturing and pouring facts and data and information into students' minds, but having a dialogue with them, questioning the students, making them think, drawing from them and helping them to clarify their own ideas and their own knowledge, because many people do know many things and they just never have thought in such a way to systematize what they know and put it together. And just the process of being in a room with other people that are discussing and adding their own ideas is a very good way to teach. And a very interesting concept that he came up with, not, as I said, just through the use of his reason, was the idea of moral absolutes. What the good is, what good is the good, the moral good that is the way we should behave, is good apart from any specific circumstances. Ideas, moral absolutes are objective realities. They are truth and not opinion. And this is an interesting quote from him, where he says that a system of morality which is based on relative emotional values is a mere illusion, a thoroughly vulgar conception which has nothing sound in it and nothing true. Frequently in our society today, you can see people basing their values and judgments on emotional values, and it's very tempting because we are, in addition to being rational beings, we are emotional beings. That's one of the things that gives life its value. But we do have to be careful to distinguish between the two when we are making concrete judgments about behavior and the way things should be. All of the ancient philosophers felt that it was very important to be a moral, upstanding person. Only a person of good life and good morality had the right to access, to gain, to think about and teach about any other kind of knowledge. Once again, a concept that we don't hear much about anymore, but teachers, people that set themselves up to teach others, should be examples of the truly good life in all aspects of their life. And that's what these people taught and thought. So we'll begin our discussion of faith and of God by talking about our desire for happiness. Desiring to be happy, it's an inborn human trait. We have a natural desire for happiness, natural goal for happiness. And God has placed this desire within us because ultimately, to be happy, we need to be in communion with Him. We need to live the way God wants us to live because He knows us better than we know ourselves. After all, He made us. So God has placed this desire in our hearts to bring us to Him. And also, God is really the only thing that can satisfy this desire. Now we've asked ourselves this in many, many ways. Here in the cartoon, Charlie Brown is there. Okay, we want to be happy. Well, what is happiness? And we'll try to talk about that a little bit. The dignity as humans, we all have an innate dignity because we are created in God's image. We have a spiritual soul, intelligence, and free will. And we are called to God to eternal beatitude, which means eternal happiness. That's what we were created to be, eternally happy with God. So where do we find happiness? Well, we know that Charlie Brown found happiness. He looks very happy here. Happiness is a warm puppy. But now we'll just switch over to St. Thomas Aquinas, a little more erudite, a little more, so let's say theologically sophisticated answer. But the warm puppy one still works. Thomas Aquinas listed 8 ways that we look for happiness. And they go down from number 8, which is the most foolish place to look for it, all the way down to number 1, which is the only place where you're really going to find it. But each one gets a little better as you go down. Wealth. We all would like to have enough wealth to be comfortable. But wealth in and of itself never made anyone truly happy. Honor. I suppose it's a step up from wealth, but it's fleeting. It certainly isn't permanent. And then we move on to fame. Well, we know, you can't read the tabloids or the newspapers or watch TV without finding out that fame is probably even more fleeting than honor and less satisfying ultimately. Power is a big one. We see people all around us, especially in an election season, seeking power. And once again, these people, they seek it, sometimes they get it, but then they spend an inordinate amount of time worrying about actually keeping it. So they're not truly content, happy. They're certainly not relaxed. Health. We all want to be healthy. It is pretty hard to be happy without health. But once again, as you well know, health also is a fleeting good. And someday all of our health, for each human person, health will fail you as well. Pleasure goes in all different directions. And pleasure is good. Pleasure is good in its place, and we are naturally inclined to seek it. Even better, virtue. Not rigidity, not being judgmental, not I'm saved and you're not, but living a truly virtuous life is going to result in more peace and more real happiness than any of the things above it. And ultimately, God, as Thomas Aquinas said, no created good, and everything else there is a created good other than God. No created good can give man complete happiness. Only the uncreated good, which is the ultimate end of mankind. And this uncreated good is God. So what are we talking about? God. Who is this God? What is this God? Who is really a better question than what, because God is not a thing. God is not a creature. God is unique. God is God. So the first thing we could say is that God is being himself. God does not exist. God is existence. We call him the one who is. When Moses asked God in the burning bush, "Who are you? Who shall I say sent me when I go off on your mission?" And God said, "I am who am. I am who am. Tell them I am sent you." God is existence. He is both radically immanent and radically transcendent. In a very real sense, he is within us. He is present to everything that exists, intimately present. But he's also transcendent. He's beyond us. He's beyond our being, our way of being. He is above and outside of things that we can intellectually grasp in their entirety. Doesn't mean we can't understand or learn anything about him. I mean, look at all the theology books that have been written. But we will never completely grasp him, as St. Augustine said. If you understood him, it would not be God. So the minute you say, "I got it, I'll tell you what, totally this is what God is," well, whatever you're describing is incorrect if you think it is a total description of who God is. God is the source and sustenance of all that exists, and ultimately, the Trinity, God is a loving communion of persons. We won't go into any more detail right this very second, but we say that God is love, and in order to be love, you need a lover, a beloved, and the fruit of that love. God within himself is love, a loving communion of persons. So, as human beings, as creatures, how can we know that God exists? The Catholic Church teaches we can know that God exists simply by using our senses and our human intellect that is inborn, that is innate to our nature. We can look at material creation. Everything that's around us, everything that we can see, hear, feel, taste, touch, smell, tells us something about who made it. Everything tells us something about its maker. Even if you and another person make a pan of brownies and bring them to a meeting, you each make your own pan. People will be able to tell by looking at and tasting these brownies that they were not made by the same person. Well, maybe if you used a mix, but if you used your own recipe, they'll still be brownies, but you can tell two different people made these things. If we look around us, we see order, harmony, beauty. We see even natural processes have a purposefulness to them. They don't occur randomly. And also, they are all impermanent. Everything that we can see, we know there was a time when it was not, and there will be another time when it no longer exists. So the things that we see around us, including ourselves, are not the cause of their own existence. the cause must be something beyond, something that does exist, because it must exist. Even looking at the human person specifically, we are aware that there are non-material aspects to our being. We have thoughts, we have ideas, we are creative, we tell jokes. All of these things are non-material. We also are aware that we need to be in relationship. We were not made to be alone. We are made to be in relation with other persons. We do have a longing for truth and goodness. We want to know what is really true, and we do want to know the good. We have a conscience. We have something that kind of pricks at us when we're thinking about making a decision, especially a moral decision. We're looking for a purpose in life. This is pretty universal. At some point, all of us say, okay, what's it all about? Why am I here? And if you do look around in humanity as a whole, some sort of religious customs exist pretty universally. In all places and in all times, there is a certain desire for ritual, for honoring power that is above us. Sometimes we honor nature, but we are actually honoring who is beyond nature. Where did nature come from? We have this innate tendency to worship. And you find this in all cultures that have ever been. And there's something called natural revelation, or sometimes cosmic revelation, which it's similar to what we just talked about. If you just look around, I mean, look at the stars, look at the universe, look how it all kind of works together. This is not a personal communication from God, but it is looking at the work, at His work, and discerning just from looking at it that there must be a creator behind it. And then there's historic revelation, where God reveals Himself through history, including through sacred writings, such as sacred scripture. There's a couple of quotes here. One is from Dei Filius, which is from the First Vatican Council, which was in the 1800s, where it was declared that God, the beginning and end of all things, can be known with certainty. The fact that He exists can be known with certainty by the natural light of human reason from the things that are created. And even in Romans, in the New Testament, we find that since the creation of the world, we can discern some of His invisible attributes just by looking at the things that He has made. So Thomas Aquinas, quoted in the Catechism, said, "The world and man attest that they contain within themselves neither their first principle nor their final end, but rather that they participate in being itself, which alone is without origin or end. Thus, in different ways, man can come to know that there exists a reality which is the first cause and the final end of all things, a reality that everyone calls God." This was St. Thomas's conclusion, and we're going to talk a little bit about ways that he suggests would lead you to this conclusion. St. Thomas came up with what he called 5 proofs for the existence of God. Some of these are more compelling than others, and more than likely, none of them would actually convince a committed atheist, particularly a committed atheist whose mind was not open to being changed. And there are people on all sides of every question in that category. The first one which is relatively simple. He simply calls it the first mover. And he says, just by looking around, you can see that some things are in motion. And anything that's in motion has to have been moved by something else. There can't be an infinite series of movers, so there must be what he calls a first mover, something that is not itself moved by something else. And this is what we call God. Okay? A little stronger argument is called the first cause. He states, first of all, that some things are caused. Actually, anything that we can look out and see was caused. You were caused. I was caused by something. There was something that brought us into being, and that applies to all of material creation. Actually, it applies to spiritual creation such as angels, because they are not eternal either. So anything that is caused must be caused by another. In order for this series of causes to have been initiated, there has to be a first cause, something that exists because it must exist, and that isn't caused by another. And this is what we call God. Similar argument is, very similar argument, is a necessary being. Most beings are what we call contingent. That means that our existence, your existence, my existence, your cat's existence, your rock's existence, it didn't come into existence through itself. It was dependent on something else to bring it into existence. So everything couldn't be contingent, because otherwise nothing would have ever started. So this is clearly false, since there is something, not nothing. So since not everything is contingent, there is a necessary being. There is something, someone who exists, because existence is his very nature, and this is God. God is the necessary being. Two more things that Thomas came up with were, first of all, number 4, what he calls the greatest being. And he says that some things are greater than others. Whatever is great to any degree gets its greatness from something that is even greater. And ultimately, there must be a being which is greater than every other being. This is the greatest being, and this is God. Here's a phrase which has been somewhat misused recently, but Thomas did come up with it. He called it an intelligent designer. And simply put, by looking around, you can see that many things in this world that have no intelligence in themselves act for an end. Lesser biological beings that move around, they have a purpose. It's not a random movement. They have a purpose for moving. Even single-celled organisms, they have to take in nutrition. They reproduce themselves. Their actions are purposeful. Animals act purposefully. Even inanimate objects seem flowing water, which flows downstream, rain, which waters the crops and the plants that look for the water and the nutrients in the soil. Whatever acts for an end must have been directed by some intelligent being that set all these complex, interrelated processes in order, that designed how it all was going to work together. And so the world must have been designed by an intelligent designer, and this is God. This plays right in, for example, to evolution, which is ongoing, actually. That appears to be the way God designed things to operate. Maybe he did create a single hydrogen atom, and from there, the processes that over billions of years resulted in the world we see around us today, with all its complex interactions, were existed first in the mind of God, and they are now being played out in time. A generation of seekers. The United States, as secular a society as we are, actually is extremely religious also. You find within our country a multiplicity of religious beliefs and practices. Freedom of religion is a core tenet of the existence, the very reason for being of our country and the way that we were organized. Many people initially came to this country because they were not permitted to celebrate and to live out their religious beliefs in freedom in countries that they originally came from. Even within our country, we see many people searching for connection with a church community. Sometimes they tend to reject the traditional churches the way they are set up, but they're still looking for that connection with a worshiping community. It's a very active desire in our society. In the Catholic Church itself, we every year, even though in spite of any problems that we have, there are many people seeking to join our church through the RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation for adults. So we have a very strong religious sense still in our country, seeking connection with our ultimate end, with God. And the many, many charitable institutions and activities in this country. There's reason for a lot of hope that we have not, on the whole, rejected God, in spite of some of the loud voices that would like you to think that perhaps God has become an outdated and meaningless concept. It simply isn't true. There are people that say that, but there are also huge numbers of people seeking God and worshiping God under many different philosophies and theologies. But we're all seeking that same ultimate happiness, that same ultimate goal. There are, as I mentioned, forces in our society that are trying to take us in the other direction. If you can read this cartoon up at the top here, this is unfortunately pretty true. I mean, you probably haven't seen a table in your office, in your place of business that looks exactly like this, but is this not what we are doing? Let's begin with a prayer of thanks to the Almighty. And what is this Almighty? It is the dollar. So everyone has a God. Everyone has something to which their life is dedicated and which underlies their choices and their actions in this world. And to some extent, for some people, it certainly is the dollar. There has been a rise of both atheism and agnosticism in this country. There has been actual antipathy to religion, trying to erase any mention of God and religion from the public discourse and make it seem something very private and kind of outdated and weird and, just get your religion out of my face kind of thing. There has been an exaggerated interpretation of the divide between church and state. Nobody who founded this country intended for religion to be totally absent from the public discourse. What they intended was that no one religion would be able to subjugate everyone else and every other belief, that all people who come to live in the United States would be free to publicly express their own individual religious beliefs and bring their points of view to the public square. There's actually more than one freedom from religious foundation. People like in this little not cartoon, but picture down at the bottom. Hey, I like having fun on Sundays, biking, baking, and sleeping in. That's my idea of a Sunday. And they're trying to make that to be very appealing. So that there are forces at work against the religious element of our society. Also, just the way we are being encouraged to live from advertising and from many other sources, materialism and hedonism. Okay, get what you want, live for pleasure, moral relativism. I'm okay, you're okay, I can't tell you what to do, you can't tell me what to do, which is related, of course, to individualism. Whatever's good for me, whatever's good for me. And this is actually the opposite of humanity, where we are, like it or not, dependent on and affected by the actions and decisions made by other people. We do not live in isolation as much as sometimes we think we might like to. It just isn't the way human beings are created to be. So these are some of the forces that exist today that are fighting the forces that are trying to lead us to God. And here's a few possible questions for discussion. If you would like to get together with a group of people or just to think about it within your own mind. Just think about some ways apart from God where people look for happiness and some really illusory paths that you find around you in popular culture. Is there anything? What can you do to concretely help others overcome doubts and fears in their search for God? And we have to remember that in any relationship between us and God, the initiative is God's. He is always reaching out to us, and it is up to us to respond and to accept His overture, to say yes to God. Yes, I do want to be in relationship with you. Is this the way you're used to thinking about God, or are you used to thinking about it like it's all about us? We're the ones that decide. Just a few things to think about.